What is it that you think is the hardest to overcome right now as a woman in society?
Repeating. So a man repeating what the woman just said, and all of a sudden we think it's brilliant. Sexism is still alive. Misogyny is still alive. Listen, money is power. At the end of the day, go for the dollars.
Hi, and welcome to the first episode of High Noon Tea. In these podcast episodes, we're going to be speaking to top women leading society's many different industries, from business to finance to tech to food. It's getting you all of the news, everything that you need to know if you want to propel your career, jumpstart it from wherever you might be, whatever stage in life. And I'm very excited today because I'm joined by Caroline Codsi. Thank you so much for joining me.
Such a pleasure to be here, Lola.
Honestly, honoured, very honoured, my first guest.
Honoured to be the first guest.
Caroline is a Canadian businesswoman, and she's also the president and founder of Women in Governance, which is a non-profit organisation that you created in, 2010?
That's right.
Yeah. And it's an organisation that helps women get into decision-making roles and helps promote gender equality in the workplace. So let's start off a little bit about you. Tell me about yourself. How did you get to being where you are today?
Thank you, Lola. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version because it could take hours. But in a nutshell, I think what's important for your listeners to know is, first of all, I did not have the easiest of childhoods. I grew up in Lebanon. I was born in Beirut. And the Lebanese Civil War lasted 15 years, from age 7 to age 22. So when you talk about, overcoming your fears, when you talk about courage and resilience, I think I got to experience that firsthand at a very young age. And I honestly think that it shaped the woman that I am today. At age 17, I lived in Paris on my own. My parents were in Lebanon, so no money, no parents, well, very loving parents, but far away. And literally had to make it on my own to be able to put myself through school. I had 2 jobs, and I went to school, went to university, and then I moved to Canada when I was in my early 20s for the second time, because I lived here for a couple of years as a child with my parents. But all that to say is the fact that I had to overcome so many obstacles at such a young age. I think I was literally put in a swim or sink situation, and I decided to swim a marathon. And I'm someone who has a lot of energy. That also helps overcome a lot of, the frustrations that people can experience in the workplace, where, people will see any obstacle as a difficulty, and I'll see it as an opportunity. Living here in Canada, my first opinion of this country is that, wow, there's equality everywhere. And then my own career started to progress, and then I started discovering that there were huge gender gaps in many industries, some more than others, pretty much in all industries, and especially at the top of the house. My own career progressed pretty well until I made it to executive vice president of one of the largest medical expertise firms in Canada, and realized, reporting to an all-male pale-stale board, that there were just not many women around me, and that a lot of the women that had graduated at the same time as me seemed to be stuck a few levels below. And so this is when I thought I need to do something to change that rationale, sensitize women about what they need to do to, as you said, jumpstart their career or propel their career, and what businesses need to do to be more attractive to women.
I mean, that's, wow. That really, just all of that, even just moving to Paris, like you were saying, at the age of 17, I think that's so commendable. And coming from Beirut, I can't even begin to imagine how difficult that was. And so it makes sense as to the resilient woman that you are today. You talk a lot about gender parity. Could you explain in layman's terms exactly what gender parity is, why it's so important in today's society?
Sure. Well, our society is composed of 51% of women. Mm-hmm. These women are also 60% of university graduates. And what not everybody knows is that there are 80% of buying decision making. So in a home, pretty much everything, it's the woman who decides. The house itself, the car, what the kids wear, what the husband wears, what she wears, what car they drive. The decisions, and that's global. These 80% is not just in Canada. Of course, certain countries not as progressive, but pretty much these are numbers that you will find everywhere in the globe where the women tend to be the ones who make a decision. But those who actually make products, offer services, the decision makers there are mainly men. And they are catering to the women, which makes absolutely no sense. So to me, there are several pillars that we need to look at in terms of how do we close the gender gap and why do we close the gender gap? Why is it so important? Well, first of all, there's what the women need to do themselves. You know, I talked about resilience and courage, and women need to work on, well, all women are very resilient and brave, but they need to believe in themselves more. They need to overcome the imposter syndrome, and they need to get out of their shell, not be shy, raise their hand, say, I'm ready for a promotion. I deserve that salary raise. I deserve to be the one put on that project. Then there's the men who need to be real champions and allies of the cause, because if we are amongst women telling each other how brilliant we are and how better the world would be if there were more of us in decision-making bodies, that's not going to be enough. The men are the ones who still have the power. They need to believe in this. And for that, there is ample research that demonstrates the benefit of having women and men working together, the complementarity of talent, the different perspectives, the robustness of their decisions together, more innovation, more employee engagement, better financial performance. So there is a true ROI right there. Although nobody ever looked for the ROI about why do we need men in companies. But that being said, many consulting firms researched why we need the women. And so now we all agree, we need the women. How do we do this? The third pillar is the companies. Mm-hmm. Corporations need to change their culture. They need to change their policies. They need to implement some very concrete initiatives to allow women to progress from entry level all the way to the executive and to the board. And at Women in Governance, and this is, what has really propelled us globally, we've built a Parity certification where organizations actually will answer a certain number of questions. There's about 80 plus to better understand where they stand on the parity spectrum. And so then they can really start working on that gap. Because how can you close a gender gap if you don't know its root causes, you don't know its magnitude, you don't know its origins? You have to understand all these things. And then the fourth pillar is government. The Canadian government has always been shy to legislate in favor of women, and we don't have what Europe has, mainly the Scandinavian countries who are the first ones to adopt gender quotas for boards. France has done so for the past decade, and they've got twice the number of women on boards compared to Canada. It's quite remarkable. In Canada, we have Complier Explain, that is that we've inherited from the Brits who've applied it, and it does work, but not as much as actual legislation. And what I always say is when you legislate, you find the women, and when you don't legislate, you find excuses.
Why do you think then that Canada is so perhaps far behind compared to Europe in creating these legislations, creating room for women to get into those decision-making roles?
Well, I think Canada, and it's exactly the same thing in the United States. I think Canada and the US, the mentality of enterprise is very different in the sense that they don't like government getting too granular in their business. And government would rather not get too involved in the way businesses run themselves. Europe is different, especially France. After legislating for women on boards, they also have a legislation for women in executive committees. So getting into the corporation, which is, for some Canadian business people, they think this is outrageous. So the culture is different. The mentality is different. We do have, in Quebec, we're the only province in Canada, if I'm not mistaken, we have a governance law. It's called in French, la loi de gouvernance des sociétés d'État. So the crown corporations, the Hydro-Quebecs of this world, the SAQ, SAAQ, etc., they have a legislation that's been around for more than a decade, requiring 50% of women. And miracle, in 5 years, we were able to attain these objectives on every one of the 23 crown corporations of Quebec.
Oh my God, that's That's amazing. To circle back a little bit, when we talk about the different industries, obviously you were mentioning how there's certain industries that are more difficult for women to perhaps pierce into, percer, like to really broach. What are the industries that you see right now where it's a bit stagnant? There's little wiggle room for women to really like get into it. What are the industries you see?
Well, what I think is wonderful is that they're all actually working actively on it. Okay. I'm not a big fan of pledges and hashtags because that's not concrete work. The way that, let's say, organizations that get certified with us, they'll get all the recommendations, the benchmarking, the best practices, so they can implement very concrete measures that will bring about change and recertify year after year to look at the progress that they've accomplished. That being said, I think in every industry today, there's an association for women in mining and women in finance and women in tech and women in STEM, etc. So the movement is very strong. Many large organizations are backing these associations and supporting them. But I think it's going to be essential to get into the very concrete actions that they take to recruit more women, to retain more women, to promote more women, to equally compensate the women that they have and give them equal opportunity at every level of the organization. So definitely some, I would say some industries are lagging, and I've been very vocal about STEM disciplines and the importance of having more women in scientific and in technology and engineering, mathematics, etc. Especially since, if you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, at the time, these were the mathematicians who allowed men to go to the moon. So if you're sending men to space, and it's these women who, by the way, mostly were Black women, then IBM came with their computers, and then the whole industry changed, and the women started going out of that industry and the men coming in. Now we're working to bring the women back in, but they're facing a lot of misogyny, they're facing a lot of sexism and unconscious bias to this day. So it's doing a lot of work to sensitize what these organizations need to do if they're actually sincere about their desire to have more women.
And what would you say right now, to women out there that are listening, any stage in their life, and they want to get into those leading positions? Where do you start? I mean, it's such a big question, and I know that it's like there's not one right answer, but what are the key things you would suggest for anyone wanting to get into any of these fields and get into those decision-making roles? Decision-making roles.
Well, first of all, it needs to be clear that not every woman has to have that ambition. But if you do have that ambition, then you need to follow through, because it's detrimental to all women when a woman gets an opportunity for a top job and she declines it, sometimes because she feels she's not ready, she's not good enough, she doesn't believe. And so that is not good. If you are offered a promotion, if you're offered an opportunity, chances are you've never done that job. You don't know how to do that job. It's going to be scary, but you got to go, you got to do it. It's a stretch assignment. This is how you're going to grow, and this is how you're going to develop. So I would say the very first thing is, if we could go into schools and start talking to the younger girls about the fact that there's not one discipline that's more male and one discipline that's more female. Traditionally, when I was younger, women, girls, were oriented towards human resources, towards marketing, men more towards finance, tech, operations, where the big dollars are, where you are actually going to rise to the CEO role. So it's much more often that the CFO will become the CEO, and much more rare that the chief marketing officer or the chief HR officer is going to become the CEO. If you really want to make it to the top, and also if you want to explore industries that are very lucrative. I'm the mother of 2 children, a boy and a girl, and my daughter, who's a lawyer, she, after working for several years as a lawyer in mergers and acquisitions, etc., decided to go back to school and study cybersecurity, and now she's a cybersecurity lawyer. And that, to me, is fantastic, because she goes where the money is. And at the end of the day, a lot of women will say to me, oh, money is not what's important to me. Listen, money is power. At the end of the day, go for the dollars.
Yeah, Oh my gosh, no, it's so true. I think that the whole idea of holding back and not really feeling like comfortable, I think that that's also such a play in society that women don't necessarily feel comfortable. We're not educated to go for those roles, push ourselves to be in them, to really like be go-getters, because typically society is, well, that's the man's job. He's the one who provides, so you can you don't have to be as aggressive, quote unquote. What is it that you think is the hardest to overcome right now as a woman in society getting into these roles?
Honestly, I think unconscious bias is still taking too much space in our world. And the men and the women, by the way, do have unconscious bias. And so we really need to sensitize to things like, for instance, in a meeting, it's so important to allow everybody to have a say. And, a brainstorming session should include everyone if you want some richness and robustness as an outcome. And there's still a lot of man interrupting women. And that's their studies, right? They're observing board meetings and just regular meetings and finding that the men will interrupt the women a lot more than they will interrupt other men. Mm-hmm. So this, sometimes women are taken aback and they will intervene less. There's the repeating. So a man repeating what the woman just said, and all of a sudden we think it's brilliant. And so I might say something in the meeting and nobody picks it up. And 10 minutes later, George says it and everyone thinks it's a wonderful idea. So by talking about these unconscious bias, first of all, I will say, thanks, George, for picking that up. Because nobody had reacted when I said it earlier. Mm-hmm. Or if I'm shy, maybe Lola can say, thanks, George, for repeating what Caroline had said earlier. It's so important that we discuss this. So, these are in our everyday meeting, and it's still a reality. And then the last one, which really bugs me, is the mansplaining.
Oh, gosh.
Which is usually a man explaining to you what's one thing if he wants to explain something to you that you know nothing about. But mansplaining is usually about your specialty.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So I don't get that as much anymore. But I can tell you that 10, 15 years ago, I had men explaining to me how women were going to make it and, all about gender equality. And I thought, excuse me, who are you? Mm-hmm. And why do you think you know better than me in that topic? So this, I think, is still an obstacle. Sexism is still alive. Misogyny is still alive. But we do have a lot of male champions, a lot of allies. At Women in Governance, men have literally propelled us and put us where we are because they, a lot of male CEOs of major organizations that said, this is wonderful, we need this, we're behind you. Mm-hmm. So I really believe in working together at it.
But do you not find, because, you're talking about mansplaining and sort of speaking up in meetings and those situations, for me, personally, I've had situations like that where I don't speak up and I don't know how to do it because I don't want, there's a stigma, I think, where it's like, if you speak up, then you're a Karen or you're annoying or, there's just sort of this stigma around.
Be a Karen!
I know, but it's such a, I suppose it also just starts with like one woman doing it, then everyone's going to start doing it. But I think there is still, unfortunately, such a big environment where women feel like if you speak up then you're naggy or you're this and you're perceived as that because men unfortunately have this vision and have been told, well, that's...
And other women, by the way, often and other women, which makes it even harder.
Yes.
I think that if you're nice and you're pleasant and you come from a good place and you're doing this not because you want to speak over others, not because you think your opinion matters more than other people's, but because you are part of whatever project it is, whether it's through work, whether it's a nonprofit, whatever you're working on. And if you believe in it and you think your contribution matters and others should think the same way, I think they'll take it much better. I've often been told, you can get away with anything. And I thought, I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm not shy. I've never been shy. My voice is strong. It's always been strong. And that's the other thing. Sometimes women, we don't hear them. You have to speak loud. You don't have to scream, but your voice has to project. And it has to project confidence. You will be far less interrupted. And if you're interrupted and you say, I'm not done, excuse me, but you do it nicely.
Yeah.
You do it politely. You don't have to be Karen, really, right? So I think it's really up to us to still take the space that we deserve, but do it nicely. So embody these female characteristics of empathy, of active listening, of democratic leadership, but at the same time, embody male characteristics of being bold, assertive, saying what you have to say, and not apologizing for it.
Mm-hmm. I like that, the non-apologetic, living unapologetically by your true self. I think that's really so important, so key. I wanted to ask you, can you give us some examples of, women-led companies and organizations that you've seen propel themselves because perhaps it is being led by a woman?
Oh my goodness, there are so many examples. Without giving you any particular name, what I can tell you is that what we've seen is when a female CEO arrives within the organization, or even a CFO, female CFO, etc., when there are more women at the top, and we're not saying just women, because that's not better. We're not looking for 100% female leadership. This is not better. Why? Because then you fall into the same, just like when it's dominated by men, you fall into the group think. Mm-hmm. Everybody thinks the same way, everybody agrees, and so there goes the innovation, there goes the risk management. So once you have more women around the decision-making table, they can actually sensitize to certain risks. They can actually give you their own perspective on a product, on a service. We all have blind spots, men and women, we all do. And the beauty of having men and women working together is that all of a sudden, these blind spots are removed by the other gender, but also other members of diversity. I mean, it's also important to ensure that there's ethnic representation, that there are people from maybe diverse sexual orientations, diverse age groups as well. Mm-hmm. To me, that is so important. A board composed of 60-year-old white men, nobody should invest a penny in that. And institutional investors are actually no longer putting their money there because they know they're not going to get their best return. Yeah. And so this is the power of the purse, bringing these organizations to realize, oops, I'm going to lose my investors. I'd better do something about it because apparently I don't get that, today it's only obvious that you should have women at the top. And if this is the way that we need, to speak to them, if it's activist investors or institutional investors, so be it.
Amazing. I want to talk a little bit about women in governance. What you do, the work you do there. What is it that you're doing to help women get into those roles? How are you helping them?
So for a large number of years, our main focus was our events. Mm-hmm. So bringing top speakers, global speakers. My goodness, we had Hillary Clinton. I've had the privilege to do so many fireside chats with amazing people like Tarana Burke, #MeToo, and mm-hmm. etc. So inspiration, also top CEOs, top chairs of boards, mm-hmm. women and men, talking about their own path, talking about what women need to do to get to the top. We also have a very robust mentoring program, one for executive women, one for professional women, and governance training programs. And then in 2017, we thought, okay, all these women that are being trained, that are getting all the mentoring that they need, that are going back into workplaces that have traditionally been built by men, for men, and they're not actually conducive to allowing these women to progress, equally with their male peers. And this is when we decided we need to go a step further. Mm-hmm. It's not the women that need to be fixed. Mm-hmm. It's the workplace. Mm-hmm. It's the culture. So how do we do that? And so we did that by creating that Parity certification, which has literally become our core. When we launched in 2017, we had 17 major organizations go through it. In 2022, we had 83 organizations go through it. In 2023, it'll probably be 100 more, I don't know. And you've got, large multinationals, you've got Quebec corporations, you've got Canadian organizations, and of all industries. And this is the beauty of it. It's that You've got those that are platinum that are doing very well. And you've got all the other organizations that may be struggling a little bit more. And some are bronze and have been bronze for years, but they are progressing very slowly but surely. Because, honestly, the way I see gender equality, Lola, is if you are driving a car up a hill and you let go of the gas pedal for 2 seconds,
it goes all
you're going backwards.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, during COVID, we saw it more than ever.
Yeah.
And Simone de Beauvoir used to say that, it's in French. I'm going to try to translate it in my head real quick. But women's rights are never guaranteed. The minute that there's a crisis, whether it's social, economic, political, that is the first thing that will go backwards is women's rights. So we need to be vigilant throughout our entire life.
Yeah. So would you say then that during COVID, that was a big step back for women and their rights, and that now you're sort of, going back forward, trying to pick up the pace?
We're trying to catch up.
Okay.
Definitely during COVID, we were on such a good trajectory. And at the beginning of the pandemic, women were disproportionately impacted much sooner and much harder than the men, losing their jobs, but also opting out of the workforce. Because we realized that to this day, women are those who do more than 2/3 of the work around the house, chores, taking care of the kids. That hasn't changed much. The younger generation, the men start to take care of their children a little bit more, but they're still not doing the dishes. So there's still a long way to go.
Yeah.
So these women just decided to quit their jobs because they couldn't juggle.
And going back to women in governance, for any organizations, women who either want to get involved and help the organization or want to get help from it, how is it that they can reach you, find you? Because you're based in Montreal, right?
We're based in Montreal. We work throughout Canada and the United States.
Okay.
So womeningovernance.org or .com or .ca all leads back to us. Just contact us, and we're more than happy to help you through the journey of closing the gender gap in the workplace.
Amazing. And do you have anything coming up anytime soon? Workshops?
We do. We actually have a major gala coming up on September 26th, which will be co-chaired as our tradition, always by a man and a woman who are CEOs of a Parity certified organization. So it's Eric Martel, who's the CEO of Bombardier, who is co-chairing with Manuel Houdard, who's the CEO of CNE SST.
Okay.
And we expect close to 800 people at Palais des Congrès on September 26th.
My word, that's amazing.
And that'll be our 10th gala.
10th?
Yes.
Oh my word. Wow.
So long dress and black tie.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. I've learned so much just from this conversation. I feel like I've become a whole new woman. Not listening to anyone anymore. No more. But I really appreciate it. I really feel like everything you said was so spot on, and it's incredible. And I hope that whoever's listening will feel the same, and I'm sure they will. And they'll know how to contact you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lola.